Some thugs literally came in and like flipped over desks. They arrest the driver, they impound the vehicle. It was like legitimately a sting, and pay fines for drivers and deal with impounding because that's not their fault. He was a very good betting man. He said Travis is going to come back from Paris and he's going to tell us that we're launching Paris. It was really a ton of engineering effort. He continues to hold a special place in kind of the pantheon of Uber cities as our first international one, but the first of many. People want this. But the important part was that the local regulator downloading the app, because yes, in fact, they have this problem. Like, yes, in fact, this is a better way to make money out of your existing commercial vehicle. There were certainly markets that we were not successful in those efforts in, and we pulled back from, where if you were like a livery driver, you couldn't go directly from dropping one client off to picking up the next client. You had to go back to your garage.
Hi, this is the third part of Uber story with Dom, who has been with Uber since its inception days. If you haven't watched the previous episodes, please watch them first. In this episode, Dom will discuss about some of the roadblocks that Uber faced during its initial days and how Uber took them head on. Can you talk about the first international launch of Paris, the story behind that? And I want to actually touch upon how speed was very important and efficiency was very important for Uber at that time.
Yeah, so it's a great story. So we were talking earlier about kind of this launch process and kind of how tactical cities were chosen and stuff like that. That was to be clear, a much richer and kind of robust process that we implemented kind of in the early to mid of Uber's kind of real growth curve. Paris was a substantially earlier story. And in fact, I think Paris was, I'll probably get this wrong, if it was the 8th or the 9th city we launched, it was something like that. Like, this was very early on in the growth curve.
Around what time?
This was in 2011. This was really in that first year after I came in full time. And so really that summer when I came in full time was where we started to launch a bunch of places. As I said, we'd already done New York. We launched a bunch of other major markets in the US, Seattle, Chicago, DC, probably Dallas, I think Denver. I may get some of those wrong. LA for sure was in there. There was a tech conference in Paris at the end of the year that we knew about. Travis had talked about it in the past. I think he had gone to it in the past. I actually think, now that I'm thinking about it, I actually think the idea for Uber kind of had its inception at this conference between Garrett and Travis years prior. I don't know why Paris. It was an event called Low Web. It was just CEOs and people in tech would go there. And it was late in the year. I don't remember exactly, November, December, something like that. But we had no notion of this. We had no kind of collection of this. But I remember that late in the summer, maybe early fall, Travis had done a trip to Paris. I honestly don't remember why. Maybe a different conference, or maybe it was personal vacation or something. This other engineer, I just remember him saying, he's a very good betting man. He said, Travis is going to come back from Paris and he's going to tell us that we're launching Paris. I just have a feeling. And sure enough, Travis came back and he said, there's this tech conference called Low Web. I want to announce at this conference, which is, I think, I don't know, early December again, end of November, something like that. I want to announce that Uber is launching here. He said, I want to tell the story that Uber began here as an idea, and we are now launching Paris as our first city, as like a thank you to the great international city of Paris. This was like late October, mid-October or something. We're hearing about this. And we had launched a number of cities at this time. Fine. We already had the idea in the system of different vehicles with different pricing, kind of market by market. Fine. Different requirements for drivers, for documents in different cities. But Curtis, who was the head of engineering at the time, he's like, yeah, we need to support like French and like euros. These are some different concepts. These are not concepts that were anywhere in our tooling, in our databases. We got to like add columns for things that we had not considered previously as being dynamic, to say nothing of having different bank accounts and currencies and like a corporate environment and all of this stuff. And so Curtis was kind of like, well, we need to have this stuff done pretty far ahead of time so that we can like test this out and know that we're good to go ahead of Travis's announcement, right? Like, we can't make him look bad by announcing this thing that then doesn't work. We stood up like basically a 2-week kind of death march on engineering to implement, really it was language and it was currency everywhere throughout all of our systems. And by language, I mean not just French, but actually like a system that could support translations coming in of different languages, because we knew we wanted to add more in the future. Same thing on currency. It was really a ton of engineering effort because we pretty intentionally wanted it to be the first and last time we had to add another language, right? We wanted to put the systems in place where engineering wouldn't hold the business back again as we expanded to different markets, at least as a translations and currency perspective. And it was really tough. It was one of those scenarios where like we didn't know enough as engineers to give like a reasonable deadline estimate. So instead we just kind of like put a guess in the sand, like this seems like 2 weeks worth of work, and then just like had to really do everything possible to get it to happen, because we had committed to the rest of the business that was going to be the date. I mean, it was really, out of all of the hard and long hours that I put in at Uber, this one really stands alone. It was like back-to-back all-nighters. We were buying 5-hour energy by the pallet. It felt like there was an engineer who fell asleep standing up in a stand-up the next morning. So he'd been at, he was on the 72-hour mark or whatever. It was like incredibly unhealthy and would not recommend. But there's a camaraderie that comes from that, right? And there was a real celebration and an excitement around having this thing, accomplishing this goal, and Travis announces it on stage, and it was fantastic as we're watching a live stream back in San Francisco as we're all catching up on sleep. But it was pretty wild. And, we did achieve not just that immediate goal, but we did achieve our kind of broader engineering goals of like building a system that would power that aspect of the business for years. And, on one hand, it was super painful to do early on. And it was very much kind of a stop the world engineering challenge where we didn't do any other feature development on any other products because this one was so important. But having it done early, really paved the way for the international expansion that went on, I think, to be a big part of what made Uber super, super successful. And that I attribute a lot of that to kind of the foresight of Curtis and kind of the other engineering leads to say, yeah, we got a short timeline on this, but we got to do this right, because we can't afford to do this again, right? Let's do this right so that we don't have to do this kind of march again. As you look around the ride hailing landscape now, but also 3 or 4 years ago, the number of players that have the international scope that we do is functionally zero. And so, one part of that is having worked hard early on. Another part of that is the business then taking advantage of what engineering had done and really kind of blow it out wide. But yeah, Paris continues to hold a special place in kind of the pantheon of Uber cities as our first international one, but the first of many.
Wow, super interesting. Can you touch upon some of the challenges, maybe regulatory challenges, technical challenges, ops challenges, or let's say driver and taxi agencies and all? Like when you were launching in different cities, can you touch upon those events and how did the team deal with this?
Yeah, the regulatory story is an interesting one for Uber over the years. I guess, as I kind of said earlier, we operated in an interesting space where, yes, we were a tech company. Yes, it was a kind of a technology-driven product. But at the end of the day, this was something that happened in the real world. People making money in the real world, choosing to use this product and get in cars with strangers in the real world, right? Like literally what your parents told you not to do, as a kid, kind of for your own safety. And so by its nature, it's interesting. On one hand, like this felt like something different and new, right? Like this requesting a car thing to a driver who has a profile in this system, and the ride is kind of kept track of location wise. Like this is novel. But at the same time, cities and regulatory bodies in general are not really they're not really set up to deal with new things. They're set up to figure out how to fit something into the existing laws and the existing regulatory regime, right? And especially if there are analogs and there are pieces of the existing economy that kind of look close to it, it would be natural. I'm somewhat sympathetic, frankly, to trying to fit this new thing into the rules that already exist. Where this comes to a head for Uber is, prior to Uber, what is the product that allows you to get around a city if you don't have a car? It's a taxi for the most part, right? You go to the curb, you wave your hand in the air, kind of look like an idiot, Travis used to say, and then a car shows up. It's bright yellow. It has this incredibly important and special metal disc somewhere on it. Usually it's riveted onto the chassis that's got a number, and that number tells you this is a blessed individual who has permission to pick you up without a pre-arrangement and drive you to somewhere else in the city. The other mechanism to get around is a luxury car, which usually for Uber, for anyone who's very young as a listener and doesn't know how this works, used to work by you picking up the phone and you saying to the limo company, I would like a ride tomorrow from my very fancy office building in Manhattan to my very fancy penthouse, and I'll be picked up at 5:18. And then they say, fine, the driver will be there, no problem, 24 hours here ahead of time. And then that's what happens, right? You walk to the curb, your driver is already there, maybe your name on a little plaque, and then you go from there. Prearranged, the driver does not need this incredibly important medallion. It already has its own, they have their own regulations, right? They're a commercial driver, they carry commercial insurance. Usually cities have some registry of who these drivers are. Neither of those is the Uber product, right? It's even the early on one. The early on product, it was luxury cars, it was those same drivers, it was the luxury drivers, commercial vehicles, commercial insurance. But the ride was not prearranged, kind of, except it was prearranged. Because you didn't put your arm out on the street. That driver was dispatched to you, but it wasn't prearranged on the phone like 24 hours ahead of time. And so as we entered different markets, we found that different cities had different laws that differentiated between drivers and between taxi drivers and luxury drivers, commercial drivers differently. We fit much clearer into the luxury car thing than taxi, but not necessarily always clear enough. For instance, I might get the details of this wrong, but my recollection is Miami had a law on the books that there had to be an hour in between the time a booking was made with a commercial driver and when you could get in the car. If you're ordering it ahead of time, 2 days, a week out, no problem. Who cares? Like that law never comes to in effect. When Uber comes to town and we say, these guys are operating as limo drivers. It's prearranged in the app. There was a page on the driver app. Maybe it still exists today on the Black product. I don't know. It was called the Waybill, and it was kind of the piece of paper that you would show to prove that this was a prearranged trip, right? If you get pulled over as a driver when you're on the way to somebody, say, here, I'm a commercial driver. This is prearranged. If you're in Miami, you book that Uber. That's your prearrangement. The driver shows up in 15 minutes. According to the law, that driver has to sit there for 45 minutes before you can get in the car. Makes no sense. There's makes no sense to us, right? Made no sense to us. And so there were aspects of this when it was black and white, when it was very clear in the law where these rules were. We avoided those cities, or we worked kind of tactically, locally to get laws changed. In areas where there was more kind of gray area in the law, we would go in and kind of make a statement on where we thought we fell on these things. But our opinion on what regulatory regime we should be beholden to did not always match the perspective and the opinion of the local regulator. And so the very first time this came to a head was in Washington, D.C. And I will miss some of the details of the story. But the important part was that the local regulator, like the person in charge of commercial like livery vehicle licensing, catches wind or hears complaints from the taxi industry or something about Uber as an operation. And so he downloads the Uber app. He requests a ride, and the destination, he tells the driver, I think was a police station or was City Hall or something. And like, as the driver shows up, there's two cops there. They arrest the driver. They impound the vehicle. It was like legitimately a sting that they set up. And then I think put out some PR about it. They were very proud of this thing. And this just, it sounded so insane to us for a couple reasons. First of all, we never forced anyone to use the app on the rider or the driver side, right? Like this is a product we put out in the world to make money for sure, not just out of the goodness of our own hearts, but to solve a problem that people were then downloading the app because yes, in fact, they have this problem. Like, yes, in fact, this is a better way to make money out of your existing commercial vehicle in the downtime between your clients. Or yeah, this really is the best way to get around town. And so this idea that a regulator could be so, not just so brazen, but so proud of trying to shut down like what people want and choose to use, like felt like truly insane to us. And so from this very first incident, this then becomes a decision for Travis, right? Like, what do we do? This person who regulates this industry has decided that they think we are illegal and shouldn't operate there. Like, Travis, what do you want to do? I was not in that conversation, but like, the general counsel rushes to his office, and like, some lawyer rushes to his office, says, well, what do you do here? And you have kind of a couple options, right? You can stop, you can turn off the service, we could leave the market and go to plenty of other markets that we had much, amicable. I don't know that we had any amicable relationships with, but we had less severe relationships with, or we could kind of stand our ground, right? We could kind of make those arguments I just did. People want this. People who elect those officials, or at least elect the officials who then select some of these other regulatory bodies. We do end up in trouble the farther away someone gets from like being an official who's voted into office. A great example of this, as a quick anecdote, is airports. Airports kind of operate as their own little kingdoms. Usually the manager of the airport, at least from a transportation perspective, is appointed by some council who themselves are appointed by either the local municipality or sometimes the state. And like, you have to get pretty far away to get to an elected official. But in DC, it was a little bit easier. And so if memory serves, we literally emailed the rider base that we had in DC, and we said, here's what we think our position is from a legality perspective. If you, for instance, have some opinion about what this regulator did, here's the email address for your representative and the phone number. Why don't you let them know, how supportive or non-supportive you are of this sting operation and Uber being in your city. And that was a playbook we ended up kind of rolling out in most markets where we had issues. And the goal was simply to call attention to the disparity between the difference between what people want, which was our product, using our product in the world, and what the laws of their city allowed for, or what at least the regulators in their city thought the laws allowed for. Because if those things are different, then like these are governments and bodies that have power because of popularity, because of people, and so like they should work to change that. It worked in a lot of places. Some places that didn't as a strategy. And oh, by the way, in the meantime, while this is all being sorted out, we're going to try to do the right thing and, pay fines for drivers and deal with impounding, because that's not their fault. And we feel strongly about being in the right. But it was kind of crazy. And there were certainly markets that we were not successful in those efforts and we pulled back from. An early example off the top of my head is we launched in Vancouver, California, Vancouver, Canada. Very early on, actually, it might have been 2011, if not early 2012. Had a terrible time with the local regulator, had a terrible time with the local taxi industry. If memory serves, there was literally a incident that happened kind of in the early Uber office there. Can't remember if it might have been a co-working space even, not even like a dedicated Uber office, where like some thugs literally came in and like flipped over desks. And then just like, I don't know, I don't even know if they said anything about it being from the taxi industry, but it was just like a very physical altercation to say that we were not welcome there. And so we ended up not being able to get kind of posture from the regulatory side. And frankly, we were too early on in our growth as a company to have like enough riders, like enough users to advocate for us. And so we were out of that market, I don't know, for years. Might have literally been 5 or 6 years before we got back before the laws changed enough that we could get back in there. And so every city was kind of a play-by-play kind of experience and on would this work? Could this work? Could we make enough changes? Do we fight? Do we not? And so, yeah, it was interesting. On one hand, as an engineer, like I didn't spend a lot of time keeping up on this stuff day to day. Like I was interested for the sake of the business, kind of what cities we were or were not working in, or what laws had to change here or there. But other than the couple times where I was building products kind of directly to facilitate kind of some of these requirements, it wasn't like really, really top of mind day to day. Just one other example, as I talk about building things from engineering, one of the more interesting laws that I remember, and this was something we discovered, I think, in Europe more so than the US markets. Europe markets had what became referred to as return to garage laws on the books, where if you were like a livery driver, you couldn't go directly from dropping one client off to picking up the next client. You had to go back to your garage. You had to go back to like the office for your business. And so we had to like I remember we had to like build that into our system. We like build that into like the ETAs and the driver supply model, that like this person actually, like, yes, they're available, but it's because they just dropped someone off and they have to go back over here before they're available again. It's just like, I don't know, there are all kinds of shades of different laws around this, and we had to discover a ton of them. Hopefully, preferably ahead of time before we launched the city, but sometimes afterwards, and just figure it out from there.
Oh, great. Super interesting, and like so many events, feels super amazed by some of these things actually when I hear. Cool, man. Thanks a lot. I'll not take much of your time, but it's been super interesting, man. It's been super, like you have been super, you have been rock star in this.
It's good. I'm glad to hear that. It's been, it's fun. I imagine next time we'll get a little bit more into culture and kind of, the velocity and kind of how, leadership through that. And so, we'll wherever you want to take it.
I hope you enjoyed this episode, and we'll continue on this journey in the next episode. If you liked it, please consider liking, sharing, subscribing, and turning on the notification bell so that you get notified when the next episode is up.